Hello everybody, Mike and Abbott at ChristiansDeceived.com, bringing you the next in our series on the leaders in the covenant community. This is lesson 4. This is Nehemiah, Motivator for the people. Being a volunteer, great definition in here. It says a person recognizes a need and then goes about taking care of it without asking. Nehemiah was such a person as this. He heard of the circumstance. He did a quick evaluation of the circumstances and decided that he was the best person suited to accomplish the goal. The excuses, of course, he could have had. He had it made. Really, I mean, his position as a cupbearer was an influential position. He was obviously well respected by the king, and he had a pretty good life, of course. You know, as long as the wine was good and it wasn't poison, he had it made. But he could have come up with a lot of excuses and been apathetic about what was taking place in Jerusalem and just forgot the whole thing and let the people that were living there take care of it. But he saw a need, he evaluated it, he knew that he was the man to take care of it. He had heard about what had gone on in Jerusalem, about the walls being torn, broken down in certain parts, also the gates that had been burned, and making Jerusalem very vulnerable. And evidently the people there had I guess it's one of those things where it was that way so long that they just didn't think about it. They just dealt with the attacks. They just dealt with not having that security around them. But Nehemiah evaluated the matter and developed a plan. And he waited for the right time. He waited for the right opportunity to present his case to the king. It says in the last verse of Nehemiah 1, it says that he was the king's cupbearer. Of course, like I said, he was. That's a very serious position. He was staying at Shishah, which was about 200 miles east of Babylon and about a little over 1,000 miles from Jerusalem. Of course, he's again a person of influence, but he's waiting for the right opportunity to approach the king, because you never know. The king had all power, so he had to be very cautious. First thing we get is request by Nehemiah, and this is Nehemiah 2:5. In this study, the printed text covers Nehemiah 2:5 and then 11 through 20. It's been about 4 months since Nehemiah found out from his brother what the conditions were in Jerusalem. Nehemiah, at that point, it started to weigh on his heart what was going on there. He developed a sad appearance, and the king noticed this. The king eventually asked Nehemiah, "What's going on? What's wrong?" He's obviously down in the mouth, as we say, and the king did ask Nehemiah what was going on. And Nehemiah does a smart thing. He does a very quick prayer before he speaks to the king. Of course, we don't know what the prayer was, but we know that it was a very significant thing that was getting ready to happen. So he did a quick prayer before popping the question. It says in verse 5, "And I answered the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my fathers are buried, so that I can rebuild." So, of course, Nehemiah, the first thing he does, he begins this phrase with he shows submission to the king. He doesn't say Jerusalem. He says, "I want to go back to where my folks are buried, where my people are." He mentions the walls, he mentions the door, the gates that are burned. So he's very tactful in the way he asks this question. Next section, it says research by Nehemiah. As we go in, as he enters in the city, Nehemiah is a very on top of it guy. He's going to be the new governor for Jerusalem, and he is very smart in how he prepares for his goal, his mission. Nehemiah makes the journey to Jerusalem with the papers given by the king. He also has an escort. They know that this is significant business, and he's got to travel this long distance. So the king provided him with the credentials to do the work, and also some protection. Okay, verse 11. I went to Jerusalem, and after staying there 3 days, verse 12, I set out during the night with a few men. I had not told anyone what my God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. There were no mounts with me except the one I was riding. So, first off, I went to Jerusalem after staying there 3 days. Nehemiah's journey, like we mentioned earlier, was over 1,000 miles. It was 3 days upon arrival. Probably he's recovering from the journey, taking some time to refresh himself, and maybe working on his plan, making sure he's got that plan just right. And in verse 12 it says Nehemiah's leadership traits are exhibited here as he starts to check the details. Before he approaches anybody about what he's doing, he's going to go ahead and check the details. He's going to evaluate the situation firsthand, and then he's going to work on developing and making sure that his plan is right before he speaks to anyone about it. So he goes out at night, of course it must be a full moon, and he checks the gates, he checks the wall, and gets a really good idea of what's taking place, what his objective is going to be, and how he's going to go about doing it. So verse 13 it says, by night I went out through the valley gate toward the jackal gate and the dung gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem, which had been broken down, and its gates which had been destroyed by fire. Of course, Nehemiah confirms all the things that he's heard, and now he's ready to move to the next step. Now, one of the things Nehemiah's concern for the walls of Jerusalem reflects the concern we should have for being faithful in rebuilding our broken lives according to Scripture. And it's amazing when you look at how Nehemiah's going about doing this and the burden that he has on his heart. But if we're going to go about, and we've all faced these times in our life where things just fell apart, things just didn't work out, we found ourselves in compromising situations, or we fell away from the Lord. But we can get back, and that's the great thing about our God. Our God is a God of second chances and even more chances, whatever it takes. He's willing to be there for us. And we can use this example so far in what we see with Nehemiah, in that he has an objective, he has a burden upon his heart, and he has an objective, he has a mission, and he is developing a plan. And we can do the same thing. When we know we've moved away from God, or we've fallen into some situations that are not respectful of who our God is, we're burdening His heart with our lives, then we can do just like Nehemiah did and start to move and make plans to get our lives back on track with God.